And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Ilyasah Shabazz, the third daughter of Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz, is an educator, an activist, motivational speaker, and author of the award-winning publications such as Growing Up X, Malcolm Little, the boy who grew up to become Malcolm X, and Malcolm X, X, a novel, which actually just recently won the NAACP Image Award. Ms. Shabazz promotes higher education for at-risk youth, interfaith dialogue to build bridges between cultures for young leaders of the world, and participates on international humanitarian delegations. She has produced training programs to encourage higher education sanctioned by the City University of New York's Office of Academic Affairs. She served 12 years on the Executive Youth Board for the City of Mount Vernon's Mayor, Ernest Davis, is a mentor for Nile Rodgers' We Are Family Foundation, and mentors at various group homes, lockup facilities, high schools, and college campuses through the production of the Wake Up Tour Extra Credit Forums, her exclusive youth empowerment program. Ilyasah has retraced her father's footsteps to the holy city of Mecca, served as a member of the American Interfaith Leadership Delegation, and participated with the Malaria No More Foundation in Mali, West Africa. As well, she is was a member of the U.S. delegation that accompanied President Bill Clinton to South Africa to commemorate the election of President Nelson Mandela. She serves as a trustee for the Harlem Symphonic Orchestra, the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Educational Center, and the Malcolm X Foundation. She was a member of the Arts Committee for the New York City Opera at Lincoln Center and a project advisor for the PBS award-winning Prince Among Slaves documentary. She holds a Master's of Science in Education and Human Resource Development from Fordham University and a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from SUNY New Paltz, and is currently an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. As a white professor who teaches African American history here, I'm asked every semester by my students how and why this happened. I explain that there has never in my life been one aha moment, but instead layers as to why and how I arrived on this path. But if I had to pick one book, one historical figure that changed my life the most, it's without question her father, Malcolm X. And when I discuss this with my students, I'm very clear in that I have no artistic ability whatsoever. I can't draw a stick figure to save my life. I can't play a musical note. The one thing I have is my voice and my ability to teach. So I thought the best way to honor Malcolm X, something I promised him I would do after reading his autobiography so many years ago, would be to become a teacher and for the rest of my life introduce Malcolm X to all of my students and try to live up to his ideals. Today is an extension of that promise I made to him. I remember almost 15 years ago when Ilyasah Shabazz's book, Growing Up X, was released. I got it the first day, sat down and read it in one sitting. And what I loved about that book was how it gave me insight not into the indomitable, invincible Malcolm X, but the man, the husband, the father. But I brought Ms. Shabazz here today for you, not because of just who her father was, but who she is, her message, which she has done and continues to do to help our youth, young women, the Muslim community, and how she continues her father's work in connecting all people throughout the African diaspora. Ladies and gentlemen, and especially my students who are here today, it is my great honor to introduce to you the esteemed daughter of Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz, Ms. Ilyasah Shabazz.
Thank you so much. That was very, very hard. Thank you. You know, when I go to these museums and I see these renditions and replicas of my father, they have them like 5 feet tall. And of course, I always tell people it's nothing against short men.
Thank you.
Because we don't discriminate. You're not short. Because we don't discriminate. But if you know your father is 6'5", you want the record to be right. And so it speaks to the importance. I know you didn't even ask me a question.
Go.
But it speaks to the importance of our roles as young people, you're supposed to get yourself a quality education so that you can give something back to society, and that you serve your people, you serve your country, you serve yourself, you inspire your family. So when I see these little statues of my father, I know you didn't ask me that, but it just made me really think of it. When I see statues of my father and they have him as like 5'4", we just know that Malcolm X was a very tall man. He had such presence, as also did Frederick Douglass.
True.
Okay.
True. So what we're going to do here today is essentially have a conversation. I have also, in addition to my questions, had all of my students submit questions as well. So I've gone through those to ask those questions. We'll see how many we can get in here. And then again, I will leave time for the audience if you have any questions as well, okay? So one question that we had talked about, and I'm sure that you get 1,000 times and have answered 1,000 times, but the only reason I'm asking is because so many of my students submitted this same exact question, which was, you mentioned in your book, Growing Up X, that being Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz's daughter was such a great gift. But the question students had was it ever a burden that you had to find your own voice? Was it ever difficult just being known as his daughter, how that affected you? Did you carry pressure with you to be an activist, and how you found your own path?
When I went to college, I had gone to high school, I went to a prep school, I went to a boarding school. My mother was very much overprotective because she saw her husband killed, so she just sort of sheltered us. And so when I went to college, and people were like, oh my God, you're Malcolm X's daughter, I wasn't accustomed to that. And they would chase me through campus, are you Malcolm X's daughter? Why didn't you tell us? So there was a lot of pressure, there was a lot of expectations because I was trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do? Who am I supposed to be? They wanted me to be the president of the Black Student Union, and I could just say no to drugs. I wasn't this, fiery orator. I hadn't really experienced many challenges in my life because my mother was so protective of her 6 daughters. So it was, at that point, it was a bit of a challenge. And I remember calling my oldest sister, which I write about in my book, Growing Up X, like, what am I supposed to do? Who am I supposed to be? And she said, you don't have to pass you don't have to pass a test to be Malcolm X's daughter. Be who you are, And so when I, got comfortable in my own skin, in my own shoes, I knew I didn't have to live up to anyone's expectations, that if I could look in the mirror, and have a relationship with God and like the person that I see, then that I was good. So I wouldn't say that there was really a lot of pressure, or I would never say that it was a burden because, I'm so grateful, for my father. I'm so grateful for the man that he, was throughout his life. So it's never been a burden. I always,
Were you suspect of growing up of people that wanted to be your friend and not know if they wanted to be your friend because it was genuine or because they figured out who you were? Was that ever something that was in the back of your mind? And
no, not until lately, do I get a little cautious sometimes, because I look at, what happened to my nephew being lured to Mexico, and lured because, they told him that, young man, they told him that the Afro-Mexicans were having many challenges, and so they brought him there, but, he never came back. So things, for those kinds of reasons, I get a little nervous, but, I'm the kind of person, I like people. I don't really live wondering if someone really wants to be my friend. I have many sisters, 5 sisters, and so, I don't.
We know, or we can read in Growing Up X even, that relationship you had with your father. You were so very young. But I was hoping that you could talk to the audience about your relationship with your mother and the role that she played in your life growing up.
Yeah, my mother, just amazing woman. She had so much love, so much care, so much compassion. And if it were not for her and all of the love that she gave to her 6 girls, I don't know that I would have all of this love, in me to go and do the work that I do. My mother would say that her husband loved his people, and she loved her husband. And so she preserved and appropriated his legacy. And for me, I love both of them so much that, I see, when I look at people in the audience, I see a reflection of me. And I hope that when people look at me, that they see a reflection of themselves, and that they understand, they understand humanity, and that, I genuinely love. And so, if it were not for my mother, I don't know that I would be the person that I am. I, thought the world of her. She was very trusting, very trustworthy, very caring, very knowledgeable. And so, when I meet people who aren't that, it's a bit of a challenge for me, but it helps me to realize the mother that I had, and how grateful I am that I had that kind of person as a role model. Yeah.
I read Growing Up X so long ago, and knowing we were going to do this, I went back and started reading it and seeing what I underlined all those years ago. And one thing that struck me in there that resonates with my students that I have today, specifically speaking out of my female students, is my female students, we will discuss the issue of hair, of straightening your hair, or what does this mean in terms of how you dress, the issue of colorism, how this affects black females in terms of authenticity and these kind of pressures. And in the book, the same issues, your mother was very clear to say, essentially, do you. Don't worry about what people say, that relaxing your hair or wearing lipstick or whether or not you wear a hijab, these things don't encapsulate who you are. So I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit about that, growing up and directly to our female students.
Yeah, I'm probably the only girl in my family who wears her hair flat ironed. My hair is natural also. And, I've always also been very stylish, And so, if you look at any of, it's so funny, when we look at pictures of, our childhood, I'm always the one looking in the camera, so, I think that fashion, if you are an activist and if you love who you are and your people, what is it to say that are you supposed to, and you want to wear lipstick, you wear lipstick. And so my mother, when I went to college, I remember I used to wear this stuff, it was Posner at the time, it was this Posner, black lipstick, or blackberry lipstick. And I used to wear this dark lipstick, and I remembered, this guy came to me and said, sister, you're not supposed to wear that pig fat on your lips. And so I had never heard that before, and I asked my mother about it, and she said, no, if that's what you want to wear, you wear it. If you want to flat iron your hair, you wear it. If you want to wear it natural, you wear it. Love who you are, understand who you are, and not allow other people to dictate, dictate that.
Show of hands, who in here has seen Spike Lee's film with Denzel Washington, Malcolm X, came out in 1992? So a good majority of the crowd here. So I know that you liked the film. To my knowledge, for the most part, you liked what Spike did on that film. But instead of getting into the nitty-gritty of the film, what was right or wrong about the film, one thing I wanted to ask you about was what I would consider the commercialization of your father. After the film was released, there were X hats and X t-shirts and buttons, and everybody was trying to promote this. So in retrospect, you look at this and say, well, this is great that so many people are learning about my father and representing him. He's out there. Did you look at it and say, there are people wearing his shirt and they don't even know who he is or what he stands for? He was not in favor of capitalism. He discussed the relationship between racism and capitalism, and this is the height of it in some ways. So what are your thoughts on that commercialization of your father's image and the X and so on and so forth?
I didn't really see it as a commercialization of him. I think that his message is so dynamic and so powerful that when you see an X, that you would want to know, who he is and what this X represents, especially when, our educational curriculums aren't teaching about, a lot of our historical figures. And so I thought, after the movie, there was a resurgence in the autobiography of Malcolm X. Many people first learned about him through the movie. I don't think the movie even focused so much on the depth of who he was. But I think that, if you read the autobiography, that you learn, that you find that there's so much more to Malcolm than this film. But even, I think that film was a 2 or 3 hour film, and, in this age where we're supposed to be, the ADD people, but yet we could sit in front of a television for those many hours, says a lot about, first, what, that Spike was able to capture the essence of who Malcolm, was, but also, that we could still have interest in him and understand his work and his sacrifice. Because my father was only in his 20s, when he was doing the work that he was doing. And in his 20s and making a significant sacrifice, circling the globe, in search of solutions for this human condition that would oppress its fellow man because of the color of their skin, and not asking for a penny in return for any of the work that he was doing for himself or his family, speaks volumes. Right. He was only in his 20s, when the world learned about Malcolm. He came along and said, we demand our human rights by any means necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I often tell my students when we talk about Malcolm X in class and they say they've seen the film, and I'm very clear that that doesn't mean you know Malcolm's life. You know Spike Lee's interpretation of Alex Haley's interpretation, essentially, of his life. That's just the first step. And yeah, I had a student in my office actually yesterday, and we were talking about his passions and what he wanted to do and juggling so many things at once. And I said, whenever you're up against that wall and you're getting tired or you're even bored, think of what people like Malcolm were doing, that they never stopped, that he just kept going. 4 hours of sleep, just his whole life was dedicated to this. So to that degree then, what about in the hip-hop community when we have people like Nicki Minaj taking your father's image of the gun being by the window and then putting her own face on there, or then using that image? Do you, again, look at that as an ode to him, or do you say not so much?
Well, I think that, I'm not really one to, I don't really believe in criticizing people unless we have an alternative. Okay. And I think that, again, I thought that Nicki Minaj and a lot of other people were misinformed about Malcolm. And that picture that my father took with this rifle was because his home had been firebombed. And his wife and his babies, first of all, the Molotov cocktail was thrown into the nursery where his baby slept. And he had no protection. The police didn't protect him. He had no protection. And so he said, if I can't get protection, I have a rifle and I will protect my family. I will use it. I know the law and I have every right to protect my family. And so a lot of people, in the 1960s when they tried to kill my father's message and pretend that he was this fanatic instead of looking at the social climate that produced a Malcolm, that my father had a profound reaction to these injustices, that he was a man of great compassion, clearly, that he was a man, who was extremely responsible. I think instead of understanding and recognizing that, that we forget Hoover and the people who portrayed this false image of Malcolm. And so by any means necessary meant that we have to get a quality education, that we have to understand who we truly are, as people of the continent, as people of the diaspora, as people of the African Holocaust, that we have to understand all of this and put everything back in perspective for a miseducated, not only a miseducated nation, but a miseducated world on, the significant historical contributions of Africa and the diaspora and so forth. And so I think when Nicki Minaj did that, there's this this false, this, what is it, what is it,
Bravado?
Bravado, and I think that it was, just something that was another misunderstanding of who Malcolm was, and using that photo, which people thought was by any means necessary, I'm going to kill someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned Hoover and the United States government and their role and what they did through the course of his life. So in 1999, the United States Postal Service put him on a stamp. Ossie Davis famously said, "Does this mean the U.S. is finally giving their, quote, stamp of approval of Malcolm X when we treated him so horribly for all those years?" I also know that you strongly advocate that he too should have a holiday like Dr. King, and I agree 100%. So if the government did that, or in the case of a stamp, do you look at it as the government being hypocrites in terms of what they did and not, acknowledging their role in his life? Or do you say, no, it's about time, it's due? And
I think many people, I think it's important that we understand the contributions that so many other people made. And I think that my father, not because he's my father, but I think that Malcolm X made a significant contribution and made a significant sacrifice, enough that, yes, he should be put on a stamp, right? Because, if you look at all the different people who are on stamps, yes, I think he should be put on, as many others should be put on. Yes, I think he should have a holiday. But the only way all these things are going to happen is if we, the people, do that. I'm not one that wants to sit back and say that the government should be doing this. I think that we have to own our own power and do these things ourselves for the sake of our children, so that our children have the opportunity to fully develop, all of whom they are and their capabilities.
this book here, X, a Novel, it's been cleaning up with book awards since its release. Right, it's different though, obviously, in terms of being a novel and who it's geared towards. So what was your goal? What motivated you to say, now's the time and I want to write this particular book?
Well, not just my father. I think there's so many young men and women, who are sometimes grappling with their own fathers, And I looked at so many young people that I work with, and I would always tell them to understand, if their father wasn't in their lives, that understand, what he must have gone through or what he must have endured. And instead of, and then also thinking of my father when they say, oh, he was a drug dealer, or dope, the negative things that they say. So we all start off as great people with so much promise. And it's really the adults who are around us, that help cultivate whomever it is we're going to become. And so with my father, having lost his father, great man, he was the president of the Milwaukee chapter of the Marcus Garvey movement. He was responsible for getting Marcus Garvey out of prison, writing a letter to President then Coolidge. And then his mother, who also was an activist, she was the National Recording Secretary for this organization, that there was an effort to destroy Malcolm's family, much as there is an effort to destroy a lot of people and their families if they're doing something, in the lines of this kind of work. And I just thought that it was not only important to speak to the many who find themselves at a crossroads. Sometimes when we're in pain as young people, instead of, we don't say, I'm in such pain, let me go get a good education. Sometimes I'm in such pain, let me go have a drink. I'm in such pain, let me go do something negative, right? And so this is what happened to my father. And so trying to numb the pain and not address it. And finally, he understands that, yes, my father loved me. But because of these circumstances, he was killed and taken from us. And so it's just a matter of understanding who we are, the power we possess, and instead of, going to the left, which hopefully you'll end up to the right, the book could, help you. So it's kind of twofold.
So we've been talking a little bit about the film and pop culture and your father's image. Would you be up for another film being made today about him?
Absolutely.
Is there anybody in particular you say would want to be the director or play him at this point, or?
No.
Okay.
I'm sure there are many young people out here that can.
When your mother was burned and in the hospital in her last days, you mentioned that in the book that President Clinton called you. You accompanied him to South Africa, but you also worked a lot with the Obama campaign in 2008. So with the current political climate today, I'm not asking you to endorse or say definitely who you're going to vote for or anything like that. I wouldn't put you on the spot like that. But what is your opinion with the Clinton candidacy specifically, because you know them? There was this recent article that just came out by Michelle Alexander, really highlighting the Clintons' role in the prison industrial complex and making the argument of why African Americans should not vote for her. So just want to get your thoughts right now on that.
Yeah, I think, that's one of the books that I use in my class, The New Jim Crow. So it makes it very difficult, to endorse anyone that would play such a pivotal role in the prison industrial complex.
I agree. I use the same book. Yeah, we can leave it there. I think we all got it from there.
And I think it's important because we all remember when everyone was like, President Clinton is the black president, and so it just goes to show that we have to do our own, research, right? Not allow someone to define who we are, not give in to the media.
Absolutely.
The media's role or the media's portrayal of who we should be. I should have finished my sentence.
Another one of my students asks here, what are your thoughts on using the N-word in hip-hop, and what are your thoughts on the N-word in general with the African-American community?
Yeah, they did something on TMZ, this spoof, right? And so someone had asked me, what did I think about, if people are singing about, if they're using the N-word in music, do I think that everyone should be able to use it? Yes. I think that we shouldn't be using the word to begin with. But if we're going to write a song, and there aren't songs with other words that denigrate, Jewish people, that denigrate Italians, Latinos, Muslims, etc. So we shouldn't do that to ourselves. That's my personal opinion. And if I had children or any of my students, I know I would definitely, encourage that they not use the word.
I'm going to hope that my student didn't get motivated to write that question from TMZ, but from their own
No, I
thinking
think
and
that
reading
came
and
from that
studying.
TMZ.
So
Yeah.
I hope not. So another student writes here, is Malcolm X's legacy yours? If not, when it's all said and done, what do you want for your own personal legacy?
No, my legacy is not my father's, but it's my commitment to my people, to myself, to my parents. First, to preserve. I do this to preserve my father's work because I think it's my responsibility that I gladly accept. But I don't think it's my responsibility any more than anyone else's responsibility. I think that we all share, in that we have to give something back, to our communities. Nelson Mandela said, not until a man has both served his country and his people can he then rest in peace. And so we have a commitment as human beings to leave something back. When we look at history, we see that that's, what life has always been about. And so it's not because, again, he's my father, but, when you look at how severely we've been miseducated. You know, when you look at the Holocaust of African people, when you look at the largest forced migration of a people in the history of mankind, or when you look at, and a lot of us don't even know that, but we know about the Jewish Holocaust, which happened in Europe. You know, the significant crime committed against their humanity. We all know about that, but we don't know about, this. I mean, this is like one of the biggest crimes ever, that you would take millions and millions and millions of people out during the Atlantic, the transatlantic, and the Arab slave trades. Millions upon millions of people out of a country in ships and just ship them throughout the world. And, to cultivate a barren land, but yet none of those people are even recognized for the grave sacrifice. Refined and industrious African people who were enslaved. They weren't enslaved as slaves, they were enslaved as refined and industrious African people, who were scholars, who were architects, who had all of these different significant careers. And so when we look at that and not have any compassion or care for these individuals, that we would not honor them in our educational curriculum, that we would not honor them in history, and that we would say, here you have a month to celebrate, you have a month to do whatever you want. That's why we say Black Life Matters, because you're telling us that Black life doesn't matter. And it's not that no one else's life matters, but it means that we have to acknowledge these facts. And the facts are that it was the largest forced migration of a people who were shipped all around the world to cultivate barren land. And, and if it's not included in our regular curriculum, then that should speak to each and every one of us. Because if it were not for them, we would not have the opportunity to be here and call this place the United States of America, let alone all these other great places around the world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when my students come into class, it is very evident that going through high school, they are inundated with the Holocaust, which then, of course, creates a numbing of what the Holocaust is, but it's easier to teach that, right, in this curriculum, because they can say it was Germans, not us. To look at slavery, we'd have to admit this is the United States, this is our founding fathers, this is what the country was based on, and so instead of grappling with that or coming to terms with it, we ignore it or gloss over it. So yeah, you're absolutely right in that regard. So you mentioned Black Lives Matter, and we have now all sorts of activism, some good, some bad. We discussed the age of now collectivism instead of really grassroots organizing. So a lot of times my students will ask, what should they be doing? Is there one thing they should focus on? So what do you think today are some of the biggest issues, the most important issues they should be focused on? What do you feel are how do you feel about Black Lives Matter as a whole, and where it's going, and so on and so forth?
Well, I think it's great, that there is, that there are people who decided to get together and, organize this movement, this campaign, whatever you want to call it, Black Lives Matter. I think it's, it's very important. The generation, prior, we thought that everything was fine, until we got these smartphones where people were able to record, and we have social media where we can connect and communicate with people from all around, throughout this country, throughout the world. And so I think that, the role of today's young people, especially on college campuses, it was W.B. Du Bois who said something that, it should be the young people on college, actually, he didn't say young people, he said it should be the young men on college campuses who should focus their lives or take a part of their contribution back to society and focus on the disparities and the issues that confront people of color, and until they absolutely solve this issue, because it's been going on since since the beginning of this new world, right?
Yeah.
I think that, young people here should organize themselves. This is where the smart thinkers, forward-thinking individuals are. You have a little bit of free time in comparison to when you graduate, that you get, even if it was 10 people in your organization, committee, whatever you want to call it, plan, strategize, identify whatever the issues are, and figure out how you're going to solve some of them. Look at what the Jonathan Butler did at Mizzou, you know?
All right, I'd like to make sure we have some time here, so if there's any questions from the audience, raise your hand. I believe we have a microphone that'll come around, and you can stand up and ask your question. So we have somebody who'll just ask your question. I ask that you kind of keep them brief so we can get as many in as possible. And we're both going to be doing that, so we can get it out. Oh, right here to the front. Yep, just walk to the front.
Hello. I'm with Melanin Uprising, a youth branch from Black Lives Matter DMV. And one thing we focus on is Black youth. So growing up as a Black youth, what were some of the healing mechanisms that you used to cope with trauma? What advice would you use to give to Black youth dealing with similar traumatic experiences?
What were some of the challenges that I confronted?
So as you dealt with
Trauma?
With trauma, yeah.
Well, I don't think that my mother would think that I experienced any real trauma, because she was really she was so amazing that I had her, you know? I think that trauma could be not understanding who you are as a person of the diaspora.
Yes.
You know, or not understanding your role in society, especially for young men, right? Sometimes they don't realize that they're the ones that they should be the ones that should say that this is the standard of beauty for my women, right? That I can look at my woman and see my power in her, right? And I think that right there is traumatic. That, you know, I think that's extremely important. I think it's important to understand your own beauty, your own sense of worth, that you don't look to someone else to define who you are, but that you're cool with who you already are. I think that's extremely important, to be able to look at people who look like you and see trust, love, you know, all that kind of stuff. And just to be able to deal with people generally. I think that all of those things can be traumatic.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right here on this side. Mr. Shabazz, on this side.
Oh.
Thank you for being here today, number one. But earlier you mentioned how the previous generation thought everything was okay.
How
the previous generation thought everything was okay in terms of race relations. And how recently the emergence of the smartphone and the internet and just general connectivity, how we're now starting to see these problems and how they're receding underneath. I want to know, in your personal opinion, what do you think the future of race relations is like? Do you think it's going to get a lot better before it gets, or is it going to get a lot worse? Like, what's your opinion on that?
I think that we have to take responsibility for our social conditions. And not until we own it, instead of pointing fingers to other people, thinking that someone else is going to do something for us, and they never have, right? These issues are still happening. Young girls, young boys, you know, are still getting killed senselessly, brutally. They're getting killed. They're being imprisoned. Thanksgiving, Christmas, I think it was New Year's Eve, I'm driving, and I saw and I took pictures, 3 or 4 correction buses on their way going north. You know, so the only way that these issues are going to be resolved is when we take responsibility for ourselves and stop thinking that someone else is going to do it for us. What's going to happen? Well, if we're not doing anything about it, if we think everything is fine, right? Or if we think everything is fine, then it's going to continue. But not until we become smart, forward-thinking, responsible young people, all of what my father was talking about, by any means necessary. He wasn't saying go get a gun. He's saying, take care, do what you need to do as a human being. your role, your commitment back to yourself, your family, your country, your people. You know, everybody said the same thing. Nelson Mandela says the same thing. Stephen Biko said the same thing. So many people said the same thing. So we just have to do it. You know, I said when people sat around with Nike and they said, just do it, that was genius. You know, so it's do it. We just sit here and look around, you know, we've got to do it. We have a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, as a Black woman yourself, how have you dealt with misogyny within Black social movements from Black men, and how do you propose that we move towards a more inclusive, all-inclusive movement for Black men and Black women?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I had to answer, believe me, I would. I mean, I have my own personal opinions that I would not sit here and say, but I think we all know, you know, that there are some there's some serious issues, right? And it's the reason why I've written, you know, my books. It's the reason why I'm teaching, you know, so that I could make sure that I could get a lot of the young people who are going into the criminal justice system. I just think that we really, you know, that we have to be honest. Each and every one of us, right? We have to be honest with ourselves. We know that there are problems. So especially on college campuses, get 10, 20, 30 people and sit down and list out what are some of these problems, right? How can we solve them? And then make sure, if you're a senior, that you reach back to the freshmen and you let them know the challenges that you experienced and the commitments that you have, the commitments that you've made, you know, to your younger people, and making sure that you know, we understand. You know, here's one of the things I did. I spoke at Syracuse University maybe 10 years ago, and it was so organized. The different. It was just very organized. I went back maybe 2 years later, and it was absolutely different, because the generation of seniors who had been empowered, you know, who had learned so much being on campus, didn't understand that it was their responsibility to grab the freshmen and let them know all the things that they had learned, their challenges, their triumphs, and that it was important for them to continue to, you know, give back and all this other stuff. So I think that's another one of the things that you guys have to do, or should do. Because sometimes we take those things for granted.
Hi. First off, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
And I want to start off by quoting or paraphrasing what Malcolm said, because it's going to relate to my question. He once said, "Don't condemn a fellow Muslim because you was once that fellow Muslim that did not know better." And what my question is how would you say of how much an importance is for youth, especially for within the Black community, to have a older mentor, or if they don't have a father figure in their life, and how would that, like, you know, impact the persons?
I think it's extremely important to have mentors, you know, whether they're your parents, someone that you admire from afar, one of your professors that you know really has your best interest. I think it's extremely important to have mentors. If I did not have my parents as mentors, I don't know where I'd be. You know, there are so many times that I've had my own personal challenges, and I'm so grateful that I was always able to go to my mother, and that I trusted her, and I knew that whatever she told me was the gospel, that she was looking out for my best interest, and that she was wise. You know, so I think it's extremely important to identify role models where you can go to and you can talk about, even if it's having some of your peers, you know, that you can trust, that when you tell them something, they're not going to go run and, you know, share it, but that they have your best interest and can give you some kind of support and feedback. I think that's very important. You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
My question is, I read a lot about the perseverance that your family had to go through, specifically your mother, and I wanted to know if you could speak to what it was that she instilled in you as children, as adults, to help you maintain the regality that you have, the nobility, and the fight to keep pushing and not give up and not be depressed and not be overcome with just rage at your circumstance.
You know, I found myself once in a very challenging space. And I got this book, it's about the lynchings, Without Sanctuary. And I read how these people had endured such, just such trauma, atrocities, the lynchings, the, castrations, just all this, stuff. And I said, if my people could endure all of that, then what I'm experiencing is nothing, right? And I think because my mother, I learned about my history. I knew who I was. I knew who I was as a woman. I knew who I was as a person of the African diaspora. And I knew who I was as a Muslim. And I learned great stories and historical facts, about contributions that made me very proud of who I am. So no matter what I experienced that was counter to that, I was okay. And that I had to do that myself. So my mother made sure that I was self-reliant, by giving me these things, but so that I could understand the power that I possess as an individual, as a human being, as a woman, to fear God, not man, and to be responsible. When it's all said and done, there is a day of judgment, that
Thank you.
And that's the reason that my father was so fearless. He was fearless because, he knew, that it wasn't about man. Sometimes we say, people, what are they going to think of us if they see us acting this way? It's not what are they going to think of us. What is God thinking? If you believe in, whatever higher power, creation, and all that other stuff. Yes.
Yes. I wanted to ask you, what religion do you believe in and how it affects you? And I also wanted to ask you, do you believe that religion could resolve the discriminative mentality that we have amongst one another?
What do you think?
I believe religion, this is a mindset where we believe that one another are equal. Well, I've met people that don't believe the same way as I do. But if they were somehow exposed to religion, I believe if everyone was exposed to religion, that we wouldn't have diversity and violence. I believe that we all would believe that we're all equal and that God is the only mighty one who could change anything, really.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
But do you believe in a religion, though?
Do I believe in a religion?
Yes.
I'm Muslim.
How's that affected you?
How's Islam affected me? Great. I have my two uncles. My uncle who just passed away was a Pentecostal pastor. I grew up also going to church, where people were running around the pulpit and doing backflips. So I believe in religion. But I'm a Muslim. I was born a Muslim. I'll always be a Muslim. And I also go to, other religious places, houses. I believe in God. I believe in a higher being.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in, so I want to make sure I get this one in and lighten it up just a minute. So your thoughts on Beyonce's Formation, her halftime show? What do you think?
Yeah, it's so funny. Jamal is here somewhere. Yeah, there he is back there. And so around, I guess it was like around Thanksgiving, Christmas, he texted me. He said, we just got a call from Beyonce's camp. And I'm like, really? I said, Beyonce? And so, they asked would I be in her video. So I was like, really? What am I going to do what? So I immediately went on this diet, right? Immediately, because Thanksgiving, Christmas, you're eating everything. I have a sweet tooth. I'm just terrible. And so I thought that it was good that she could utilize her platform. I know a lot of people say, you know, Illuminati, I mean, they say all kinds of things, but, you know, I thought, well, when I saw the halftime, I thought, wow, you know, look at all of these, you know, after a while it dawned on me that every single girl that was in her video was actually African American. You know, because usually, sometimes we think in order to be aired or played that we have to put other people in our music, but then also that everyone had afros was like, wow, look at that. And so I thought it was really beautiful, you know, to show, you know, so many African American women who are natural or who are grappling with whether they should be natural or straighten their hair or whatever it is, that, you know, it says, again, here's another standard of beauty. You know, I think it would be great if men could come together and say that this is another standard of beauty, that you can put these women on billboards, you know, that would be great. So, I mean, I didn't have an issue with it. I know that Giuliani said that she did something against the New York Police Department and you know, all of these things, or some people are saying, you know, she's capitalist and, you know, that she, you know, I really didn't read in all that. I thought that it was great that she used her platform. She is an African-American woman. She is a mother, you know, and if she wants to include that as part of her art, you know, to express herself, I didn't have issue with it.
Go ahead.
Assalamualaikum, it's nice to meet you. Shoes are nice too. Anyways, okay, so my question is like, how do you, okay, it's a little close. How do you feel about like all the police killings? Like for instance, there are so many different opinions. You got one side saying, well, if African Americans wasn't going around killing each other, then maybe we wouldn't be able to, you know, come off and, you know, do what we do. And then you have other people saying, well, you know, this goes all the way back to the slavery days, so we have an excuse. So my question is, what's your opinion on it? And go ahead.
You mean of people killing police officers?
No, police officers killing us.
Oh,
yeah, I'm talking about Freddie Gray, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland.
I'm absolutely against anybody killing us for no reason. Just, you know, if there's no respect, right, for Black life, we have to get up and do something. We have to make sure that if we want the history to be accurately inclusive of who we are and what we gave to society, just like Jewish people, that we have to do the work ourselves. You know, I am absolutely for all of that. You know, do I think that police should be killing my people? Absolutely not. I don't think that there should be a field day on anyone, but not until we come together and demand respect by any means necessary. Like my father said, will anything change? We have to resolve these issues ourselves. And it doesn't matter if you're African American, if you're Kuku American, whatever your ethnic background or whatever you are, however you identify yourself, that we owe our ancestors, right? We owe those people, you saw 12 years a slave. We owe them something. We owe them. They cultivated this land for us to be here today, and we owe them something, and we have to make sure that they are properly honored. And if we don't do that, you know, shame on us.
Thank you. We only have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask it. So, and I ask this because, again, talking to students, my students tell me that nothing's changed. They're struggling, trying to put food on the table, work 2 jobs, go to school. They see police killing unarmed African Americans. So my question is very simple. What gives you hope?
You know, I tell you, when I see young girls, you know, wearing their natural hair, that gives me hope. When I go to college campuses and I see that people are genuinely concerned, that they're genuinely compassionate, that gives me hope. When I understand, when young people understand the role that they possess, right, I think that definitely gives me hope. The generation prior, you know, they really thought everything was fine. You know, that slavery, oh, that's a long time ago, that's in the past, that's over. It's not over. It's a part of who we are. And if we can sit here and learn about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, then we should be able to learn about Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Fannie Lou Hamer, Malcolm X accurately. So when we understand these things, when young people want to know, who am I? You know, that gives me hope.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you guys for coming. I encourage you all to stop by the books being sold, the reception, and Ms. Shabazz will be there to sign books as well. So thank you guys all again for coming. Thank you so much.